Watch, I'll show you. It's like entering a decompression chamber. Everything stressful is, if temporarily, blown out of my brain and replaced with this oozing synth. In an article for Laced Records, Tom Squilfelt said it sounded a bit like whale songs, and it does. It's simultaneously mournful and reassuring, a little haunted, but not malevolent. It feels safe. This feeling is appropriate, as many of you probably already know. The track is called Serenity. It's by composer Misao Senbongi, and it's from Resident Evil 4, one of the most successful and influential horror games of all time. Also, it has by far the most suplexes per minute of any horror game in modern memory. Just saying. Just saying. Serenity is actually a part of a grand Resident Evil tradition, the save room. Scrounging ammo, dodging zombies, trying to fit a key and a spark plug and a grenade launcher in your inventory at the same time, it's all incredibly stressful stuff. And that's why the games, since the very first one, have given you a respite in the save room. Take a breath, save your game, get everything organized before you run outside again. And since the very first Resident Evil, these rooms kinda had a feeling like the eye of a hurricane. You aren't safe permanently. At some point soon, you're going to have to brave the outside again, full of undead and puzzles and not nearly enough shotgun ammo. But for a few precious seconds, you're safe. This continued throughout the series. Even if a game didn't have a traditional save room, they had something like a save theme. It speaks to a core design ethos. It can't be full-on horror all of the time. You need to give players a minute to rest. And that brings us to Resident Evil 4, also known as baby's first Resident Evil. Now, I know that people say this game isn't traditional horror, and it's not as scary as your fixed camera, limited ink roll spooks, but when I played this as a recently bar mitzvahed boy, I was tense. The opening fight in the village has the goal of pushing you to your absolute limit, and it wildly succeeds after the near misses and last second headshots and... I came out of this fight literally trembling. Again, I was 13. Resident Evil 4 may not be the lurking dread kind of scary, but it is incredibly good at making you feel on edge, like you're just one missed shot away from certain death. On my umpteenth playthrough, I can game the systems and feel totally empowered, but on my first, I found the flow of combat precarious, verging on exhausting. On my umpteenth playthrough, I know which areas have enemies and which areas don't. I know when I need to be on guard. On my first, though, no security. I had no idea where Ganados might pop up, who might be a potential threat. Lakes aren't safe, lamps aren't safe, nothing is. This all culminates in a fight against El Gigante, a brute who's likely to home run you right into the wall with a tree trunk if you aren't careful. Again, it's not keep me up at night scary, but it is unbelievably intense. And so to finish that fight and then walk down these stairs onto this secluded underground dock and hear this? It's a genuinely unforgettable moment for me. It communicates through those synthy wail cries actual safety. Sure, you're in the eye of the storm, but nothing's gonna hurt you here. I adore this series tradition. One of my favorite parts is how the theme grows and changes over the games, from the simple synths of the first couple to the endless atmosphere of 4, to how the originals are changed and updated in the remakes, all the way to Resident Evil 7, which somehow sounds like a decaying acoustic deconstruction of the first. It's brilliant. I also find it fascinating that the contrast to horror isn't happy either, isn't bright and bouncy. Happy music is just distorted by the scares. Instead, it's just a return to something like neutral, the thing presumably most needed by the characters in these dramatic situations, and the thing most needed by a 13-year-old man. Resident Evil isn't the only series that's discovered this either. And here's where things get cool, because horror games in general have some of the most strangely beautiful tracks I've heard in gaming. Is it because these games are just really good? Well, yeah. But I think there's a through line here, something deeper than just non-scary music makes the scary stuff more scary. There's this kind of longing present in all these tracks, a desire to return to something that maybe hasn't even ever existed. Look, okay, this is all getting very poetic very fast, so let me put my money where my mouth is, and by money I mean Foggy Nightmareville, because it's time to talk about Silent Hill. I mean, have we ever been spoiled for choice more than looking for beautiful music in Silent Hill games? There's Promise and its reprise, everyone's favorite, just sad piano that's a little too intricate to allow a full descent into mourning. There's the unsettlingly motivated Rain of Brass Petals, a song that doesn't even appear in Silent Hill 3 but is on the soundtrack, and more importantly feels like it understands the anxieties of these characters perfectly. There's the incredible Not Tomorrow, which has the distinction of being quietly melancholy, maybe tinged with hopefulness, while playing during a scene of true horror. Silent Hill's music frequently makes the choice to unnerve rather than outright terrify. They undercut themselves to achieve a greater atmosphere, a choice I couldn't respect more. And a choice I've already talked about at length. Whoops! But my favorite is what Not Tomorrow morphs into in the next game, Silent Hill 2's Theme of Laura. It still blows my mind that this song is from a horror game at all. It is so many things. My friend Henry noted that it almost feels like two tracks layered on top of each other, this acoustic bass of guitar and strings drowning in the ambience that defines the rest of the game's sound. But rather than these styles conflicting, they accentuate each other, just like the bizarre combination of the original Not Tomorrow and the grotesquerie it scores. It gets the Silent Hill sound. It walks that tightrope so well. It's definitely got spooky vibes, but it also just rocks, and not in the way where it seems like it's trying to make the game feel badass, because that almost never works. Just in the way where this is like a song that I would actually listen to. That longing feeling though, the one I mentioned earlier, that's here in spades. This is probably not an experience shared by every age group, but the general vibe of this song, the alternative bordering on emo, just hit this really specific musical memory for me. Music analyzer extraordinaire, Polyphonic, hit the nail on the head.
It feels like something that would play at my high school dance.
Doesn't it feel like that's exactly the vibe James is clinging to here? One of the false and faded glory of high school dances, of that foggily remembered best night of our lives. The entire game is framed around a trip back to a town based on the memory of one nice weekend he had with his wife, back when their relationship was magical and the future darkness was just a speck on the horizon. When this game was made 20 years ago, I'm sure the tone of this song had a completely different connotation, but I, like James, can only see things through clouded memories. This song, like the entire town, is a surprise punch of nostalgia. It's no surprise that Akira Yamaoka scored essentially every Silent Hill game. He gets this series. He has helped define its essence. music brings those subtextual feelings to the surface. It's why I use it in every minute of my videos, and it's certainly not unique to one genre. But it has a special power in horror, maybe because our emotions are already so heightened, maybe because the simple act of being afraid inherently connects us to that world better. Fearing something means that even for a couple minutes, that thing has power over you. And while some horror uses that power to just, keep scaring you, it can also be leveraged in a different direction, using that built-in empathy to subvert those spooks into something even more compelling. The game Amnesia: The Dark Descent is familiar to most gaming folks. The horror game that popularized the no fighting, only hiding first-person gameplay, the scariest game ever, the game that launched 1,000 screaming Let's Players. A lot of people have also heard of the sequel. After all, it has one of history's great names. Amnesia, a machine for pigs. But I rarely, if ever, hear this game actually talked about. There are vanishingly few monster chases in the game, it doesn't have nearly the clickbait ability of the first, and it's also just really weird. I mean, the subtitle is A Machine for Pigs. It does not make itself easy to parse. The game takes place at the very end of 1899. You play as Oswald Mandus, a dude who wakes up in a cage and has, wait for it, amnesia. As you wander around your spooky house that periodically makes loud noises, Oswald determines that his children are stuck in the bowels of his house, and he has to descend into the depths to find them. The machine for pigs part comes into play as our protagonist discovers he's got a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. Oswald, good ol' Ozzy, reliably amnesiated, gradually figures out what's going on with his other half, Mandus. The dude, stick with me here, took a trip to Mexico, plundered an old temple, and found a stone egg. That stone egg showed him a vision of the future so unbearably horrifying that Mandus went full doomer, plunging all his resources into a machine that would basically kill all of humanity because complete annihilation would be more merciful than the 20th century. Also, he killed his own children as a sacrifice to the machine, and because it would be kinder than them dying in World War I. Woof. Also, the machine turns people into pigs. Humans are the pigs, but also pigs are the pigs. That's the name. A machine for pigs is what Mandus creates, but also the world is a machine for pigs. We are all pigs. It is a weird, fascinating game. One that forgoes many of the horror game mainstays that its own predecessor helped create. In case you didn't get this from the paragraph about the guy killing his kids because of World War I, it's a game about psychological horror, and that chases you through the halls far more often than, like, big pig dudes. Oh, but there's one thing I didn't mention, and that's that this game is scored by Jessica freaking Curry. For those who don't know, Jessica Curry was a longtime co-head of the studio The Chinese Room and is basically a rock star of video game composition. Dear Esther's remarkable score was all her work, and she both directed and composed Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which I can't play here because I'll get demonetized, but trust me when I say it is maybe the most beautiful score to a game ever written, ever. It's on Spotify. Go listen to it, please. But in between those two games, she also wrote the score for A Machine for Pigs, and did not miss the opportunity to make some truly bone-chilling sounds. But because she's Jessica Curry, it also has this.
Download is 70% completed.
This song, titled Mandus, plays over the final section of the game, as you find the core of the giant machine you've been trekking through over the last several hours. A voice pleads with you not to turn off the machine, tries to express how awful the coming century will be, and now it's not your Jekyll or your Hyde, it's the machine itself, sentient enough to be utterly horrified by the future.
A house of skulls in the jungle. The innocent Mandus, trod and bled and gassed and starved and beaten and murdered and enslaved. This is your coming century. They will eat the Mandus. They will make pigs of you all.
And given the content of this monologue, it seems like the song should be extraordinarily grim. Dead kids, mustard gas, nuclear bombs. But instead you have this delicate series of broken chords, giving way to strings and a vocal track that both just race up and down, faster and faster, almost like the industrialization Mandus and the machine have been treading. And it's not victorious. It's not a defeat of the prophecy. Everything they've seen in the 20th century does come to pass. But it's not horror either. It's this sense of sheer inevitability. And it's an incredibly difficult line to walk tone-wise. How do you sell a finale in which the character's ultimate choice is to ensure the continuation of the world wars and mass starvation and all of the other cruelty humans are capable of, but by doing so also ensuring humanity? What does that sound like? But it's almost silly to ask these questions, because we know what it sounds like. Because Jessica Curry nailed it, as she always does. We have Mandus, as well as the following song, The New Century, to beckon us into the dark. At this point, you might just be thinking, great, Jacob likes pretty songs, awesome, good job. And you're right, I do like pretty songs. But it's not always enough to just throw some nice sounding music in your horror game and call it a day. In The Evil Within, a game directed by Resident Evil 4 mastermind Shinji Mikami, it does the same safe room trick as Resident Evil. No enemies, take a breath, inject some green goo into your brain. But the game indicates it not with moody synths, but with a really familiar song, Claire de Lune. Virtually every time you hear this song, you can zoom back to the safe asylum through a broken mirror. The song should hit that same Eye of the Hurricane feeling as Resident Evil, and it's fine? I'm certainly not here to throw shade at Debussy. The song itself is gorgeous, but it doesn't stir the same feelings within me as those quiet typewriter rooms. It doesn't have the same weight as those synth whales slowly calling. The thing is, Claire de Lune isn't much beyond pretty in this game. It doesn't really hit that nostalgia center, it doesn't yearn for a world different than the one we're in. And I'm criticizing The Evil Within, the game I genuinely like a lot, to set the table for a game that does this exceptionally well. You know what? A game that does almost everything exceptionally well. Hell, it deserves its own title card. Flip the switch. Here we go.
You must not wander too far away from the brain complex.
The Evil Within 2, still helmed by Shinji Mikami and still starring the first game's not particularly compelling protagonist, released 3 years after the first one and sold about 25% as many copies. It also knocked my freaking socks off. This game has style. There are so many deliberate choices here, like how utterly weak you feel, or the deliciously indulgent and Twin Peaksy coffee drinking, or the fact that nothing tells you this nightmarish white doesn't go down with a simple stealth kill. Evil Within 2 feels like exactly the game Mikami wanted to make. It is genuinely wonderful and deserves to be played. Now I'm about to spoil the story, so do what you will. Describing every plot twist in The Evil Within 2 would be a difficult thing to do, and I'm not even gonna try. But here's the broadest possible overview. There's an evil corporation that controls essentially a VR horror world where you lie in a bathtub and connect your brain to this thing. They want to make the VR world more powerful so they can take over the real one. I don't know. It's not important. Point is, you're in this VR horror world. And to make the horror world work, I have said that phrase too many times, the evil corporation needed someone who could keep it stable, to be like the base of it. And that person ends up being Sebastian's very young daughter. And so they kidnap her and pretend she died in a house fire. Sebastian is devastated over the loss of his daughter while they use her to control the VR world. Still with me? No, that's okay. It's not that important either. Sebastian's wife, Myra, is obsessed with the idea that their daughter isn't dead and was instead captured by a shadowy organization. She joins that organization and goes inside the VR horror world with the plan of rescuing her daughter, but when she gets there, she kinda loses control inside the system and decides that both she and her daughter should stay there forever. But then Sebastian shows up and shoots her corrupted form in the head, a bunch of times, and that brings her back to her senses, and she realizes that Sebastian should take their daughter and go. But she has to stay behind and destroy the evil within, if you will. On paper, it's not Hamlet. The first game had a similarly convoluted plot, and I played through that whole thing without really caring about any of the characters. And while I adored Evil Within 2's gameplay system,